Okay, so here's the back of the N62 engine. Everything nice and exposed for you guys to see. I'm gonna have a bunch of bolts to remove to get that off there. That is a 19mm socket that fits on there. And then we'll get that end pan out. New gasket on the pan, new pan. Hopefully make everything nice and leak free. You guys can see all the antifreeze build up on the inside here. Also, you got that valley pan that needs to be done. That'll be the next thing that I do. Just waiting on the part to come in. You guys can see the transmission leak in there. We'll get that cleaned up as well. Okay, so we got all those bolts out of those. Those are again the 19mm socket that gets that. Starter's located right there. You can see there is actually an opening for different location on the other side on the 545 that I got. It's right there. Gotta lift that starter out of the way. Just pops right out of there. And we can take the wheel off. Okay, so we got all those bolts out of the center. The starter, that was just bolted in. A couple of the bolts that attach the tranny housing to the engine block. Real easy. So all I did then was I took my hands and I put them opposite each other. 10 and 4, 9 and 3, whatever you want to do. And then I just kind of wiggled it back and forth so that it came off the center ring there about 1/2 millimeter at a time. And then once it got pulled out, you can see there is a small pin that aligns with the flywheel. So as far as putting that back in, if you're worried about any weight issues or anything like that, should line back up. Okay, so now moving on to that rear coolant cap. Those are held on, it's held on by 10mm bolts. There's a number of them around the outer edges. So we'll go ahead and get those out of there, get the new part in. The new part I found online, I think it was around $35, $40. So nothing too bad. A couple jugs of coolant will actually run you more than that if you keep dealing with a leak like this. So we'll get that replaced and hopefully be leak free. So 10mm bolts removed, just left one in there to kind of hold it in place. You'll see the one that does pop out, there is actually a fair amount of coolant that was left in there. So that all drained out, good to capture it someplace. And the new part comes right out. Before I had undone all those bolts, I actually did clean up the surfaces on the back of the engine a little bit to make it easier for everybody to see. But should just go ahead and take the last one out. The pan comes off, and this is what we're looking at in the back. And I can look, and there is the seal on the back of the pan. So new pan, like I said, I found it online, 35, 40 bucks, wasn't bad at all. So, new pan's on, all the bolts are in. Again, those are 10mm socket that's using to do that. Used a torque wrench, looked up the torque spec on it, and it said 10 Nm. Converts to about 7 foot-pounds or about 84, 85 inch-pounds. So it did say that different forums that I looked at said that there was a torquing sequence, and some recommended using a gasket adhesive, and some recommended against it. I chose to, so I went ahead and put a little bit of silicone on there. And as far as the torquing sequence, I couldn't find anywhere out there that it actually was listed. I'm sure it is someplace, I just wasn't able to find it. One thing that I decided, I actually work for a German company that uses a lot of these same types of seals. And the torquing sequence is usually in some sort of an X pattern, starting in the middle and moving your way outwards. So being the fact that I use the same type of a design on the equipment that I work on, I use the same thing here. If I could have found the sequence, I would have done that, but I think it'll hold up pretty well because the equipment that I work on actually generates a lot more pressure than this. So now we'll go ahead and start getting everything all back together, get the flywheel on, and start getting ready to go back in the car. One thing that I should note, as long as I'm back here, if you take a look right underneath where that coolant pan is, you can actually see rear main seal that goes on there. That actually is just one large piece, and again, it is held on. If you want to go ahead and do that at this time, it's 10 millimeter socket. Take that off. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 4 coming in from the bottom for that plate. And that plate is and seal is sold as one large piece. I looked up prices, and you can see them anywhere from $45 to $100 out online. I was kind of fortunate. I didn't really have to do anything with it and clean it up. Didn't find anything. My big issue was the coolant leak. So being the same size bolt, usually similar torque specs. If you guys need to do that in your car, it's right here. And again, it's just that one large piece with the 12 bolts in it. So getting the flywheel back on, I took the time to clean it up as long as I had it out. All the extra coolant that had kind of washed over it. And as I had mentioned, when I took it off, there was actually a pin mark down there, a little one sticking out from the engine, and actually a hole for it right in the flywheel itself. So it goes on aligned just like it came off. These are 19 millimeter bolts or socket to take those off. And looking up the different forums, looking at the spec sheet, it said they should be torqued to 77 foot-pounds. So I took my torque wrench and made sure everything was tightened properly, and pretty much all assembled. We'll get the transmission back on here shortly. One thing to note on there was, as you're torquing it, obviously the crank's going to want to turn. So you need somebody in front in order to put a nut on the front crank and hold it while you're torquing against it. That's what I had here. Something I've done on engines in the past, which if you don't have anybody else around, you're doing this on your own, is to look for a hole where you might have something threaded on the back side. Or in this case, I looked at it right there. I would have been able to put some sort of a tool right through there and then have it propped up against there. Not the ideal way to do it. It's easier, and I just don't like the idea of pressing against metal that I don't have to. So fortunately, I had somebody here that was able to put a nut on the front of the crank and hold it that way. But that is a way that I've done it in the past.